Welcome, friend. I have the fun, the honor, the joy of talking to an old friend of mine, one of the few living heroes that I actually have, and clearly an American hero for many of us. And time and eternity will prove that you were right on so many occasions.
But
Dr. Alan Keyes, Ambassador Alan Keyes, former presidential candidate. But before we get started, I want you to tell the story of how I was the first one to actually lead you into the jailhouse.
Well, I have to be perfectly honest, though. You were the occasion for it, because when you were protesting against Barack Obama
At Notre Dame.
And I started reading the reports that were coming out, and it was an occasion where I was deeply convicted. Now, your action was the occasion, but I think the conviction actually came from the Holy Spirit, who started beating me up around the head and neck.
Well, I certainly never asked you to be arrested. I couldn't believe that you said you wanted to.
No, but the point was that you were appealing for folks to come stand with you. And being someone who has gone around the country telling people that we really have to sacrifice whatever we need to sacrifice in order to bear witness to God's truth, particularly on the issue of life, it was as if that appeal was made directly to me, and you were trying to make me feel bad. But even if you weren't, the Holy Spirit was doing it for you anyway.
Well, when we
and so I ended up feeling like, oh, I've got to respond. I've got to do something.
When you called me, I was in jail. I had gotten arrested, and I felt like I couldn't make it. We were there for a certain number of weeks, and I was arrested. I was alone in jail, and I remember praying, saying, God, you have to send someone. I said, and in fact, I actually pictured Simon of Cyrene helping carry the cross, and I said, God, I can't go on. I was stammering. God, you got to help me. And I got out of jail, and you called me. And said, and you started crying on the phone, and I started crying on the phone. You said, God showed me that I've got to come there, and that I'm going to get arrested. And I was like, Alan, are you all right? I'm so honored that we had that time together. And we were not successful in getting him canceled, but we were successful in getting the attention, literally, of not only national media, but international media.
Well, and I think that that's what's critical now, because sometimes we forget what I think Mother Teresa said at various times, that we're not called to be successful, because in point of fact, if we understand what we're about, the success has already been achieved. We're not going to do Christ one better and be more successful than he was. He's achieved the success over all. We're called to be faithful in bearing witness so that others will accept the fruits of Christ's success. And I think that is part of what was going on at Notre Dame. We were just called to be witnesses.
Do you ever consciously think about the fact that we're playing for the day of judgment?
Well, certainly.
In other words, there's a lot of times when I'm thinking, why am I doing this? I'll second guess myself, and we're probably not going to be successful in our goal, but we're going to be a witness. We're going to speak, and hundreds of thousands or millions of people might hear us through the media. And then I think, I'm playing for an audience of one. I'm playing for the day of judgment. I'm helping leave a record.
That's right.
Does that ever compel you, like, okay, God, I'm going to quit?
I think it compels me a good deal of the time, because Christ says not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, is going to enter into the kingdom. And I always imagine a moment in which you are approaching, as it were, the kingdom of God, but we need an introduction on account of the fact that we have let ourselves become estranged from God. And Jesus is there to give us an introduction, but he's not going to give us the introduction if he doesn't know us. So I think it's really something to be kind of concerned with on a regular basis.
Happy is the man who always has the day of his death before him.
Yes, I also know. Well, see, I don't really think of it as the day of death. And I think in some ways, and I've had to school myself with this, because when I was younger, I was very much one of these people. I read about death a lot. Montaigne was a big preoccupation because he wrote a lot about death, and other philosophers write about death, and you think of yourself as preparing for death and stealing for death and so forth and so And somewhere along the way, God enlightened me with the fact that that preoccupation means that I'm not listening, that I'm not comprehending. Because death is not the preoccupation of one who has actually accepted the truth of Jesus Christ. I am preoccupied with life. See, and my concern is that here I am living, and there I'll be living, and if I don't live the right way here, I won't be prepared for life there. It's all about life.
That's good.
I think it's pretty clear that from Christ's perspective, and from the perspective of God, even in the beginning, when Adam and Eve were created, there's always a part in Genesis that is intriguing. It's because in that day you shall die, is what Christ supposedly says about eating the God supposedly about eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But in Greek, it actually reads, "Dying you will die," the Greek words, and the Hebrew words track with that, as if it's not a question of one death that's going to occur. It's a question of a process of dying that has been happening, but that will happen with a finality that's not the usual thing.
Question for you. I have a question. What makes you afraid? What are things in this life, either now or in the times past?
Oh, well, many things made me afraid in times past because I was all preoccupied with this physical body, so physical things made me afraid. You can't help but have physical fear anyway. So if I stand too close to the edge of cliffs, I get this apprehension because I'm one of those people who feels like I'm not going to be able to resist the temptation to just kind of fly and
You
see
and
if it
Winston
works
Churchill.
out.
Winston Churchill said, "I'm not going to stand too close to the edge of a boat. I'm afraid I'll jump over."
No, not so much jumping as testing out a theory. But
You can't fly. I'm letting you know right
no,
now. You cannot fly.
well, you know that song. Yeah, so this shows how alienated you are from our contemporary culture, because wasn't there a song?
I believe I can fly.
I believe I can touch the sky. Yeah, that's exactly
You take
right.
the lead, I'll harmonize.
But so when I don't know. There's possibly a part of me that wants to test out that theory, but there are obviously other things that one is afraid of. I remember being on one of those little aircraft when I was in the State Department, and
Jim
part of a
Croce.
delegation we were wandering around talking to the various opposing sides in southern Africa. Now, these are people at war with each other. And so when you're flying around talking to people who are at war with each other, you very often have to fly over the territory that they're warring in. And the interesting thing about being a diplomat is that unlike soldiers and all that, they go into warring territories, but they're prepared to defend themselves. Diplomats go into warring territories, with nothing but their, diplomatic intentions.
And chutzpah.
And so you have gotten an assurance that the party you're flying over, when you're going to talk to the enemy, is not going to shoot at you. So you're relying on their word that nothing's going to happen to you, and meanwhile you're flying over their territory and thinking to yourself, well, what if the word didn't get to everybody? This is, after all, Africa. Communications isn't great, and so forth. And so you're
prior to cell phones.
You may fall prey to that. And there came a point in that flight where on one of these little planes where we went through this storm, really bad one, and we're bouncing up and down with those sort of gut-wrenching drops and all of this sort of thing. And I'll admit that, and I apparently wasn't the only one, it was one of those times when I discovered full-fledged what they say is true. The fear has a smell, and the smell of it filled that cabin. And though all of us were sitting there looking diplomatic and everything, it was still the case that it filled the cabin. And it's one of those testimonies to the fact that, yes, mind over matter or spirit over matter, it does happen.
The straight lines that you're giving me are so bad. I have everything in my power to not talk about, say, depends. How afraid were we in the plane? All right, let's change the subject. So you had this experience. What makes you afraid on the cultural side? What makes you afraid?
Well, this is what I was going to get
nations?
to, though, because I think, especially as I have gotten older, but also as you gain more experience.
How old are you?
And right now I'm going on 64.
You look good.
Not as good as I ought to, my wife says.
She's a beautiful
I look
woman.
about 40 pounds over what I need to look.
There's more of me to love, honey.
No, you just mentioned that, but this is one of the drawbacks of having married a beautiful woman, because she's still beautiful, and I'm over here looking like me. And this makes what was always a contrast even worse, you know. So you walk into the room, people say, "What on earth is she doing with him?" But anyway, it changes because you gain experience, and you actually have brushes with death. I've had a couple where you had every reason to believe that you were going to die, and you come out on the other end alive, and you've been through it, and yeah, were you scared? But guess what? When you're actually going through the experience, one of these, I was coming back from a speech I had given in Rockford, Illinois. I never forget the circumstances. And I and a friend of mine, Jim Phillips, who was my traveling aide then, and we were driving in this limousine. And we were talking the way we usually do, and napping a little bit and talking on the way from Rockford back into the airport near Chicago. And suddenly we woke up to the fact that the car was behaving strangely. We're barreling down the road at like 65 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour. And the car's kind of weaving this way and that. And Jim looks over at the driver, and the driver's fast asleep at the wheel. And the car is sort of moving along. His foot must have still been down on the accelerator, and we're whizzing along. And,
no, wait, is this a limo that's got a glass separating you from him?
It's a limo that had a glass separating us from him with one of those windows in between. This
Slides
is an
open.
important part of the story.
Okay.
Because, as I recall, my aide ends up
Wait a minute, let me do the sound
sliding
check.
through the window. He takes hold of the wheels of the car and starts trying to steer, but of course his head is down, so he can't see, and I'm trying to direct him which way to go. This is not a good way to drive a car. We didn't hit the brake. What happened was that we ended up veering off to where embankments on one side of the road where the car veers off, and somehow or another, and this is what still amazes both of us because we didn't realize it was happening. When the car finally came to rest, the car had actually flipped over, hit on its top, and flipped over again, and we ended up on the median facing the wrong way for the traffic. Still alive, both of us.
Thank you, God. Thank you, Jesus.
And the driver also, still alive, all unharmed. And we got out of the car, looked back, and just you had to wonder, because there was this huge dent in the top of the car, and we didn't even know how it had gotten there. You know, at some point, we had flipped over, slammed on the ground, and gone. And we were so intent on just trying to get control of the situation, we didn't even notice what was happening.
Wow.
And the end result, though, was that one realizes that when you're really in a seriously dangerous situation like that, focusing on what you can do means that you don't focus on your fear. I mean, it wasn't until afterwards you get up, man, boy.
This limousine smells like
just
fear.
Go through that. No, I think the whole of the area could have smelled that. But because you realize, that's when you realize that you were in the serious danger you were in, and so forth. And the other time, I was actually on diplomatic stuff. I won't talk too much about it, but got seriously sick after eating something. I mean, seriously sick. In my room, didn't even know what to do about it. And it turned out that I got to the next stop after I had gotten through this bout, and they had gotten a report that I was dead, had been poisoned, and I was gone. I said, whoa, somebody got that wrong, but not too far short of right. And so when you go through experiences that make you realize that if it's going to happen, it's going to happen, and if and when it does happen, you'll be too busy kind of going through the experience.
I want to be
notice,
lying. I want to be in my bed. I want to have my kids around me, grandkids around me, like a sickness that I know that I'm going to die, and get a couple weeks to get my house in order. I don't want to go suddenly.
Well,
if I get the only way I want to go suddenly is if I got to be a martyr.
Let me put it to you this way.
If I get to be a martyr,
let me put it to you this way.
Don't tell me that I don't know.
You're eligible for, in our worldly terms, you're eligible as a potential winner for a lottery that's worth $100 billion. So that it's enough money so that you'll never, ever, ever in your entire life have to think about money again. You'll be free to do all the wonderful things you'd like to do for everybody you know. I mean, realization of your dreams. And so forth. Are you really going to worry too much about whether the call comes while you're in bed or having dinner or on the way to work.
Would I?
I think if the call comes at any particular moment, you will happily receive that call, and that's for human stuff. So here we have God. He's going to call us at some point for an eternal life of bliss and satisfaction beyond our imagining. And we sit around worrying when the call comes. Oh, don't call me in this situation, God. Don't call me in that situation.
I heard a guy.
I frankly got over this. God, you can call me anytime. I'm perfectly ready to get that call.
Everybody loves Jesus, but nobody wants to go see him.
Nah.
I want to go see him. I just don't want to go yet. That's all. That's my only thing. I just don't want to go yet.
But here again, I have to confess, Randall, that I believe in what Christ said of us. Wherever two or three are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them. I believe what Paul said. It is not I, but Christ in me who acts. And that means that when I answered Randall Terry's call to go to Notre Dame, and I ended up marching there next to you, and we ended up in prison and so forth, guess who I was with that day?
Our Lord Jesus.
I was with Jesus. Jesus looked an awful lot like you. I can't necessarily say it was an improvement, but how am I to know? But the truth is, we go through experiences like this, and if every now and again we remember what he told us, we will, either before or after, often not during, we'll realize that, just like the people on the road to Emmaus, right? They meet this fellow on the road to Emmaus, and he starts talking to them and revealing to them the meaning of the scripture, and then he, sort of disappears. And in that moment only do they realize, oh, we were just talking to Jesus. He was with us right here. And that's the way we can be with one another sometimes. You can be walking with people, and you can be following with them, because it is not they, but Christ in them. And Christ is using their voice and using their heart and using their courage and speaking to their spirit, and they are responding so that their legs and arms and everything become his, and their mind is taken over by him, and his mind is in them, and so forth. So you are effectively walking with Jesus.
Let's switch gears and let's walk with Jesus towards the abysmal religious right. I don't mean to be unkind, but I'm vexed. You and I, at some levels, we've been in the meetings. We've met with the who's who of the leadership of the religious right, both Protestant and Catholic. We were there at various key moments when legislation was being bantered, fights were happening, what court cases were going on. And I really thought it was literally within a couple days of this filming will mark 30 years for me. When I stood for the first time in front of an abortion mill, God had spoken to me. I'd had a vision, literally, of what I was to do to fight child killing. And I had high hopes as a young man that we would crush child killing underfoot, that we would literally drive it back to hell where it came from. And clearly, we haven't. I still believe we could have. I believe that had the will been present for the Christian community to make this the hill to die on, that child killing would be gone. So there is an enormous crisis going on in the religious right. We're seeing it in some ways disintegrate. And I would like to talk with you about, we don't have to name names if we don't want to, but people are demoralized. People are demoralized. We've been told we're winning, we're going to win for so long, and there's really no major policy victory that we have had in 30 years. And they're killing babies. The same gender marriage people are in lockstep with the blitzkrieg, and socialism is growing, more people taking their neighbor's money than ever before. The government is spying on us. Things are looking bad. Mm-hmm. But we still get the fundraising letters telling us that we're winning.
Well, I would have to
about
say
the religious right.
At one level,
where did it go wrong?
Where did the religious
right go wrong?
At the beginning, because the beginning is more than half the whole. And when I say the word beginning, one shouldn't think of the start in time. One thinks of that premise or principle from which your action arises and which determines the goal or purpose toward which you go. The Greeks called it telos, I think, and it basically refers to that which is your motive in terms of your aim, and that which defines your end point.
I'm going to guess, if you're going to say the beginning, then I'm going with Jerry Falwell. I'm going with the 70s. Moral majority.
No.
No?
No. Because I think that part of the problem is that we didn't and still haven't fully understood. I've tried year after year to articulate, but people don't see it. The fact that the beginning is more than half the whole means that the premise you start from affects more than half of the consequences that you're going to have to deal with.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And we started from a premise in America that was actually a good, solid, righteous sort of premise. It acknowledged God, which is very important, and it listed among the key things.
We're talking about the Declaration.
Well, stop stealing my thunder.
I feel like I'm interviewing Bill Cosby.
But the truth is, because you have to get there by reminding yourself, the word, if you say the Declaration, it means a certain thing to people. I want to be clear about what I'm talking about before they jump into the fray with their minds and make the Declaration mean what it means today, which is nothing. Do you understand what I'm saying? Nothing. You say the word Declaration of Independence, and immediately people think of two things: equality, freedom. And the Declaration isn't in the first instance about equality and freedom. The Declaration in the first instance is about God and right. And God, because the Declaration is where the founders acknowledged God. And people say, how can you bring God into our politics? And I say, we'd have no politics if you don't acknowledge God. So if you misunderstand that beginning, then you're going to misunderstand everything else. You're actually going to misunderstand the fact that when I am dealing with the right to life, I'm not just dealing with the right to life. See? I'm dealing with something that is the foundation of the whole of American life, the whole way of life we have, and the whole moral character required to sustain that life. And I've always tried to get this across to pro-lifers and everybody else. The issue of life is not a little issue over here that we're concerned about. Well, some other people are concerned about what's happening with the energy crisis, and other people are concerned about what's going on in the Ukraine, and everybody has their concerns, and then we have to kind of negotiate whose concerns are going to be addressed and so forth. No, because that's like saying that people who are arguing over what bedspread we should put on the bed, and others who are arguing about where we should arrange the furniture in the dining room, that their concern is as important as the people who just discovered that there are folks downstairs about to blow up the basement and the whole house is going to collapse. Okay? You say it that way and you realize that some things are more important than other things.
Of priorities, yes.
And life being connected with the whole foundational basis of everything we hold to be decent and right and good in our way of life is not an issue like any other. And when you carry it to such an extreme that you are explicitly denying both the premise and the authority who laid down the premise, both of which are indispensable for maintaining our ability to put into practice the liberty and self-government and economic enterprise that we take so seriously, all of it becomes impossible.
For the sake of the listener, the viewer, your point is the centrality of God in the foundation of the Republic, that our rights come from God, that the Declaration of Independence is a theocentric document, and that the American experiment in self-government, as we saw it, does not even exist without God.
Well, that's true, and also without a certain understanding, because these days, I don't know, the bad guys, as I call them, the folks who are doing everything possible to try to confuse us on the issue of the relationship between God and our citizenship and our liberty and our justice, they play on in various ways. You can see it in the popular culture, trying to get folks, when you hear the word God, you think of, I don't know, old man with a flowing beard. You hear the word God, you think of somebody saying, don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other thing, and so forth and so on. No, the Declaration started, and this I don't think was an accident. See, the Declaration begins where the Bible begins. What's the first thing we're told in the Bible from the very first page? What's the first thing we are told about
questions.
God? No, it's not a trick question. It's an obvious question. In the beginning, right, God, what?
Made heaven and earth.
Created, made. The first attribute of God, the first activity of God listed in the Scripture is creation. What do they refer to God as in
We hold
the
these truths to
Declaration?
be self-evident that
All men are created equal and endowed by their Creator. So the first thing you're invited to do is think through what creation is about. And I actually think that we can think through what creation is about a little better. You know, we're never going to be able to think it through totally because His ways are not our ways. But we are going to be able to think it through as so far as our understanding can grasp it. And if I think of creation or thought of creation in ages past, examples might be, I don't know, somebody making a wheel. There might be somebody like the guy at the beginning of the movie Patriot putting together a chair. Right?
Mel Gibson.
You think in terms of craftsmen, you think in terms of artisans. You might get to be more complex. You'll think in terms of maybe building a house. And then you get to the concept of the fellow whose ideas inform the house. That's the architect, right? And the sketches he makes and so forth and so on. But as you get more sophisticated, come up to our day in terms of our little understanding of things, you think of computer programs, and you think of the wonderful things that you see on a computer screen or in a digital a movie, and all of this images of worlds and so forth and so on. Where does it all begin? It all begins with information. Put in a certain form, processed in a certain way, which then has a certain effect on certain elements of the matter and produces a visual effect or a sound effect or other effects that we then process. So the Creator becomes the source of information, but the Creator also is the one informing and the one what? This is what we often forget. It's not like the carpenter. The carpenter's over here, the chair is over there. The carpenter is in a sense forming the chair, and the chair is being formed by the carpenter. But when the Creator creates, the one informing and the one being informed are the same. Because in the beginning, God. See? Doesn't say in the beginning God and matter, God and this, God and that. God's working with Himself. God doesn't need to work with anything else. That's what creation from nothing means. God doesn't have to work with anybody else. God informs Himself so as to produce an outcome that corresponds to His what? What we're told by John. Corresponds to His Word.
In the beginning was the Word.
And people say, where's the Word in Genesis? In the beginning, God created, and it summarizes what He created. And what's the first act of creation? And God said. There's the Word. Be light.
All right, let's bring it around for me to the centrality of God in the Declaration. I love the parallel between creation in the book of Genesis and the echo of that in the Declaration. But where has the religious right missed it? Why are we in the pickle that we're in?
Because, in point of fact, I think everybody that talks about these things, on the one hand, they will, in the religious quote-unquote context, talk about the primacy of God. But they have accepted an understanding of politics that rejects the Declaration. Because the Declaration
Explain that.
is about the fact that justice, rights, the very institution of government which exists to secure rights that come from God. Mm-hmm. If you exist to secure rights that come from God, then the one who is determining the content of what you're securing is God. Mm-hmm. Yes? So you can't tell me that the American polity can exist in a way that doesn't pay attention to God, because the very substance of our rights, the very substance of justice as far as we pursue it, and therefore the very mission of government as it is understood in the Declaration, is a mission that requires knowing and respecting the endowment of God for the substance of what? And here's the key thing, other place where people go wrong.
The religious right has agreed to a godless discussion about public policy.
But yes, because they've been intimidated by a lie. And most people now know it's a lie. Most of the people I talk to who are believers, pro-lifers, people fighting in defense of...
I got to tell you this story. Please let me tell you this, because you'll get a kick out of this. I'm determined to not name names unless I change my mind. I took out an ad in 1992, 96. I can't remember now. Yeah, it was 92. I said, Christian, beware. Full-page ad in the USA Today and full-page ad in Washington Times. And it said, Christian, beware, do not put the economy ahead of the Ten Commandments. And then I quoted 3 issues where the Clinton campaign had definitively said it was an open rebellion to God. And then it said something like, if we put money ahead of our most sacred beliefs and the commandments of God, how can we expect God's blessing on our country? And then it said something to the effect of, is it a sin to vote for Bill Clinton? When the word got out that we were doing this, we were raising money for a full-page ad in USA Today, I got a call from 3 of the best-known leaders on the religious right, each of them, in turn, imploring me, don't run the ad. You'll make us all look bad. Don't bring God into this discussion. Keep God out of the political realm. And I said, I was so dumbstruck. I said, are you kidding me? What are we, conservative humanists? We hang our beliefs on nothing?
But I think, Randall, it's because of the triumph of the lie. What is the lie? That our Constitution requires the separation of church and state. That's a lie. It has to be a lie, by the way, because as Madison, I think it is, says in Federalist 39, he says that...
Not Federalist 40.
No,
It's
Federalist
39.
39. Okay. It's actually Federalist 39, paragraph 2, I think, because and the only reason I know that is because I just, or maybe it's not paragraph 2, I lied. But I was just writing something about this where I had to look this up again. And he says there that when they framed the Constitution, okay, and the result that they got has to be judged in light of the principles they fought for during the Revolution. Okay? And the Declaration was the statement of those principles. Yeah. So if the Constitution's put together in light of those principles, you cannot understand it unless you turn on the light of those principles. Yes? That's goes without saying. And the end result is that the principle which says God endowed us with our rights, government exists to secure those rights, which means government exists to secure that with which we are endowed, that which comes from God. How can you tell me then that we can deal with government without dealing with God? That's insane. That's crazy. Not according to Allen's religion, but according to the key statement of political principle on which our whole way of life is based. So when people in the different denominations accepted the notion that somehow separation of church and state meant you had to keep God out of politics, God out of the discussion of politics, and so forth and so on.
The discussion of right and wrong.
They discarded the foundation of the polity. They basically were saying it's okay to take this house off of its foundations, it's not going to collapse, and act as if it doesn't require that foundation in order to exist. And then they want to be all interested in the issues that arise because you're no longer constrained by the need to respect the constraints that are involved in the way that foundation is laid out, right? So people want to come down and they want to tear down the walls and they want to destroy various parts of the edifice and they want to poke holes in the roof so that we all drown. And they want to act as if...
But we'll go down singing.
They want to act as if what was supported by the foundation, and very often flooring and other good things like that are in the end supported by the solid foundation, that you can still walk on those floors, even though they no longer have a foundation, that you're not just going to fall into the abyss. And what are things that would be like the floor? One thing that's like the floor is what you were just talking about. You don't know, I think you were talking about it, but you were, and we always are. The family is one of the floors. The family is one of the things that we must build up from and use in order to continue our business and move from one place to another, and so forth and so on as people. And as the word itself implies, and that we are led by people, a lot of these so-called libertarians and other folks want to worship freedom without respect for the natural law of God and all these other sort of things. They want us to act like we can forget this, and yet we can't. That we are, when you're dealing with economics, we think, oh, money. Economics is about money. Why is it called economics, then? If it were about money, it wouldn't be called economics. Why do you say that, Alan? What's so special about that? Because the word economics is rooted in its origin in 2 words that come from Greek, oikos and nomos. Nomos was the rule that governs the management of something, right? How you deal with it. And oikos, or ekos, was the household, where the family lives. See? So economics is actually about the management of
So home
the place where the
economics as a
family
class
lives.
is actually redundant.
Redundant, yeah. Oh, seriously. It's like a restaurant I once
they got
knew
rid of
on
home
Long Island.
economics now.
It was called Lido Beach, which basically means beach. But yes, it is one of those things that you have to realize, because then what is economics about primarily then? It's about the integrity and strength of family life.
What the scripture says, though, that every man could be under his own fig tree. In other words, the sign of God's blessing was that every man was with his family under his own fig tree. Right. Land ownership, right. Peace. My fig tree is the source of food for us, and we're not slaves to the government or to the Republican Party.
What that means, what you're saying is the family is self-sufficient. In other words,
yes.
The family must be regarded as a unit that, in the natural scheme of things, is intended to be self-sufficient.
And should have primacy on a great number of levels over civil government. The order of the four governments that God created in the book of Genesis: you have family government, you have self-government, you have church government, and then you have civil government. Civil government was created last, and church family or family government arguably would be first, either that or self-government. So when the government becomes destructive to the family, which is what it is doing right now, it has abandoned its God-given role, number one, and therefore has become hostile to God himself.
Right. Now, what you have just said, put in declaration terms, is easy.
When a government becomes... right.
To secure these rights, government exists to make the rights safe. So if you're doing what's right according to the natural law and will of God, and one of the things that's right is the very first command-like instruction that God gave to Adam and Eve.
Be fruitful and multiply.
Be fruitful and multiply. The first thing he focused them on was the commission, as it were, or mandate, to be fruitful and multiply, to procreate and fill the earth, right? So the family is fundamental. The family is like the first kind of mandate of God. And if government exists to secure these rights, the elementary right would be the rights that are involved in family life. For instance, there is involved in family life a connection. Call it an obligation, call it a tie. But that tie is literally represented physically, isn't it? When the child comes out of the womb, there's a tie between the child and the mother. That literally corresponds to the word ligare, to be bound together. Okay? An obligation and religion and words like this, all of them have to do with being bound in some way to something, bound to God, bound to one another. Well, parents are bound to their children. Children are bound to their parents by ties of obligation that reflect what God has made the substance of our nature, how we preserve ourselves, how we perpetuate the species. All this has to do with how human nature continues through time to exist. So government exists to secure that.
Yes.
Which of the religious folks you know, unhappily, and I will exclude ourselves, who goes out there to talk about what's going on with gay marriage and so forth, points out that you can't force people to accept an understanding of marriage that destroys the essential nature.
Which is
and
theocentric,
doesn't respect
God-defined.
that essential nature. And when people say, well, that's not in the Constitution, I always beg to differ with them. No, I'm sorry. Which came first, according to the founders, the unalienable rights or rights that government institutes by law? Well, the answer is obvious. The unalienable rights endowed by God come before or prior to any rights established in human law. In Amendment 9 to the Constitution, we find an instruction that is a prohibition, it's part of the Constitution, that says that nothing in this Constitution, nothing in the enumeration of rights in this Constitution shall be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. What would be the first set of rights that people had from not just the beginning of the polity or the establishment of the Constitution or the beginning of the colonies or anything, but from the beginning of the world when man was first created? What rights were they? Unalienable rights, the rights that come from God. So, of course, you can't deny or disparage unalienable rights. It's unconstitutional. Everything they're doing with the courts and on gay marriage and trying to force people to accept and normalize homosexuality, insofar as it interferes with the understanding of marriage and family rooted in the command to procreate and in the activity of procreation, it's all unconstitutional as well as ungodly.
Right. Godless.
How come these people
Right,
don't
wait,
make this argument, Randall? Why don't they make this argument?
Because they have the fear of man. The fear of man brings a snare. He asked me a question, and I'm going to answer.
Oh, there you go.
No, thank you for asking, Dr. Keith. I've been thinking about this. What I think, and this is in no particular hierarchy of how we got here, but what I think is that the leaders on the religious right love the praise of men. And they want to be in photos. They want photo ops with John Boehner. They want to be invited to meet with George W. Bush in the White House. And there are unspoken and spoken rules to that agreement that you will not embarrass us with talking with shrill religious terms, that you will not be unyielding, that you just want a place at the table. And there's a toxin in the religious right that wants to be accepted. Jesus said, woe to you when all men speak well of you. That's the way they treated the false prophets. Jesus said, blessed are you when they hate you, revile you, separate you from their company. You don't get invited to the parties. You don't get invited to the photo ops because they've separated you from their company. He said, blessed are you. When
Randall, why on earth don't you understand why I feel constantly blessed?
Right. Well, he said leap for joy. We should stand up and do the little cha-cha because he said leap for joy. That's the way they treated the prophets who were before you. So I think that there's a money issue because to get the biggest fundraising gigs going, you have to have the names come to your event. So it becomes incestuous. If you want a picture with John Boehner, you present him an award. You have him come and speak at your gig. You get photographs with you and John Boehner. You send out the fundraising letter. You look legitimate. Oh, wow, that's a big shot. He was with John Boehner. And this incestuous, I need money to survive. All right, I'll make this little compromise here, that little compromise there, and I won't rain on the parade. I won't be the blank in the punch bowl. And, I think, and you tell me what you think, I think that the religious right has basically, with a few exceptions, sold out to the Republican Party. Not to God. They're not sold out to Christ. I think they've sold out to the Republican Party. What say you?
Well, I have to be careful when I say this, though.
As a man who ran for president as a Republican.
When I say the Republican Party, there are many, many people who wear the Republican label who would share, who would share our convictions.
Yep. It's Carl
I am not speaking of those people.
Yes.
But if you're speaking of the controlling forces in the Republican Party and those who are now manifested as the leadership of the Republican Party, then I think there's just no doubt that people who claim to be, I always use the term moral conservative. I never understood where this concept of social issues and all of that comes from. We're dealing with moral questions. Why we would want to run away from the fact that we're dealing with questions of good and bad. It's not just questions of human interaction. That's what the term social implies, that it's all about human interaction and therefore conventional and therefore subject to human whims. No, we're talking about moral issues, which
Justice.
At the end of the day have, according to the Declaration, already been determined to a degree that's fundamental by God. So I call it moral issues. I'm a moral conservative. The people who pretend to be moral conservatives, right, have in fact sold out to that Republican leadership in exchange for money and power, for a seat at the table, as they're always saying it, without much regard for how the table...
I don't want a seat at the table. I want the table to be made into firewood.
Well, I just want to make sure that I don't mind a seat at the table so long as the table is still in the house of God. If the table's still not in the house of God where the United States is supposed to be, then I don't want to sit at the table.
Psalm 23, the Lord prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Let them look and gnash. Let them gnash their teeth.
And by the way, America used to be kind of a house like that, where the table was set for people in the presence of their enemies. That's why so many folks came here for Haven, because you could get a seat at a table that was filled with plenty in the presence of the enemies of human nature and human good and human justice and human fairness, who had driven them out of their own country so that they would seek haven here.
Yes. Where would you rather be a Muslim woman? In downtown Riyadh or in America.
That's right.
Where would you rather be a Chinese woman, in downtown Beijing or in America? You know, there are people all over the world aching to be here who don't share the premise of the Declaration of Independence, but they see its fruit and they want some of that fruit. So I'll come in.
Well, see, and our vocation, I think, as a people to a degree, is to accept the fact that people are going
Did
to
you
be
hear that,
attracted by something.
That might have been what I said was so profound that the heavens said amen. It might not be. It might just be thunder.
But people are so attracted by the premise of what we are that they will come to enjoy the fruits. But it is our vocation to make sure they understand the premise. Don't just eat the fruits, but understand the premise. To put it in other terms, Teddy Roosevelt actually said something like this.
When
in
you're
a
done
speech
with
that
this
he
Teddy
gave.
Roosevelt line, you and I are going to go on like a Jeopardy. Dun, dun,
Yeah,
dun. We're going to go
but
on
he-
speed mode.
He made a statement about immigration. And he said we should never see immigrants as mere factors of economic production. And that we should welcome everybody, but on the basis that they have come to participate in the American way of life, to be Americans, and therefore will stand on the solid ground
Chamber
that
of
America
Commerce
stands
must
on.
have missed that memo.
Not only Chamber of Commerce. Everybody has missed it because, in point of fact, and I'll get back to the simple and singular point that I think is of all importance. The bridge between the Bible and the Constitution, which ought always to be respected in their political activity by people who are motivated by moral concern because of their respect for God, that you could call the religious right or whatever, is the Declaration. The Declaration is that bridge. They
Yes.
should be fighting
Yes,
from
yes,
that
yes.
premise. They should be making sure that bridge is never torn away, and they should be making sure that bridge is never disregarded. Instead, you know what they've accepted? They've accepted people and are starting to adulate people like Rand Paul and his father Ron Paul, I'll name a couple of names here, and others, who want us to believe that the Constitution is the be-all and end-all. And yet at the same time, they're pushing for constitutional conventions to change the Constitution. If you don't know the principles on the basis of which the Constitution was raised up and structured, how can I trust you to rewrite any part of it? You won't get it right. You're like an architect who doesn't understand the basic principles of physics and engineering and other things, trying to design a bridge. I don't want you anywhere near it. The principles have to be reflected in everything you do to amend and repair the bridge, as it was reflected in everything that was done to build the bridge.
Do you remember-
And if you've rejected the principles, you're no good.
The late Howard Phillips, God rest his soul, another great man, he fought tooth and nail to keep a constitutional convention from happening. He said, if we allow a constitutional convention to happen, we will lose the Constitution. We will lose the country. We will never get it back. And I fear.
And I loved
right.
how we were good friends for a long time. But I did have, and I was just explaining it, I suppose, because I think if I were going to found a party right now, and maybe over the course of some of those years when I was still a Republican, I should have thought of this. I call it the Declaration Party, because I think
Instead of
that
the US
we are
Taxpayers Party?
not in a crisis. The Civil War was to some extent a crisis of the Constitution because people still held to the principles of the Declaration. And Lincoln, thank God, was prudent and wise enough to understand that they still held to the principles of the Declaration, and he articulated those principles for the issue of slavery in a way that has unparalleled. It has just stood the test of time in our history, and it was his leadership that kept me a Republican for longer than I should have been, because I did not want to leave the party of Lincoln. But when it became clear that I would have to leave Lincoln to stay in the party of Lincoln, I decided that was too much. I would call it a Declaration Party because the Declaration enunciates the principles that tie us to the goodwill of God, and that make it clear, by the way, that government doesn't exist as some kind of, I don't know, arrangement of mutual selfish interest among a bunch of gangsters. So that if you want to rob, lie,
big
cheat,
cigar.
steal, kill, defraud, intimidate, we're going to let you have your freedom to do all those wrongs within certain limits, so long as you let us get away with the wrongs we want to do. That's what they're trying to make our politics into, gangsta politics. And the leaders will be the leaders of the different mafiosi in the political sense. Now, do you know what our Constitution was meant to be? is that phrase, government based on the consent of the governed. Have you asked yourself ever, governed by whom? And the phrase in the Declaration, that, deriving their rights, instituted among men, deriving their rights for the governments from the consent of the government, the just powers from the consent of the government. What does the phrase consent of the government mean? And you say, well, it means those who are going to be governed by that government. No, can't be, because they're not governed by that government yet. Therefore, at the time they give their consent, they are not the governed. They are the governing, because they're putting together the Constitution that's going to rule over that government. So in the moment when they give their consent to establishing the government, they are the governors of the government. So what are they governed by?
The laws of God.
The laws of nature and of nature's God.
Yep.
So, but who are those governed by God's laws? They are the righteous. And I hope it scalds the ears of all the enemies of true liberty.
Did you just say the righteous?
I did. I hope it scalds their ears.
I'm starting to feel
Everybody would
something.
say, oh, no, Alan, don't use that word righteous. They might think you're being religious and so forth and so on. Well, righteous simply means one who acts in accordance with right. Therefore, one who exercises right. And our whole constitution and way of life is based on respect for the exercise of God-endowed rights. So it has to do with those who are acting righteously, and it is based on the consent of those who are acting righteously. And I can prove it historically, because you look at every document the colonies were based on, the Mayflower Compact and the Declaration itself. Those documents are all, they state right at the beginning, go look at the words of the Mayflower Compact. They are people who make it clear, first of all, that
God.
they are a society formed by the fact that they have come together in the will of God to do his business. And when the founders read Locke, they found this exact formulation. Locke says at one point that we are all put in this world by our master, the Creator, to go about his business, and that's the concept they articulated in the Declaration.
All right, I'm going to become now the time tyrant, because the clock shows no mercy, and that producer back there keeps on holding up these signs saying the amount of time. So I'm going to try and do something that I don't know has ever been done with Dr. Alan Keyes, Ambassador Alan Keyes, namely, just try and tie you. I'll be the nag and try and tie you to some semblance of fast answers, because I want to like skip through a bunch of stuff in seed form. So it'll almost be a race, all right?
Oh, we'll see.
Did you all know the point of a nag? The history of the nag was when a racehorse is on a racetrack, sometimes they will run themselves to death. And so to get the racehorse to slow down, they would set a nag out in front of it, and the racehorse would finally slow down next to the nag. Top 5 books people should read, according to Dr. Alan Keyes. And then I'm going to give my top 5.
Oh, top 5 books people should read. You start with the Bible.
Of course, always the Bible first.
Always the Bible first, I think. And it has many books, so I'm finished. But never mind. I won't go there. From an American point of view, I'd say my second book I always recommend to people, and this is from an American point of view, is the Federalist Papers. Because the Federalist Papers is key to the Constitution.
I'm the nag. Federalist Papers, 1.
And so that would be the second book.
2.
Third book I think is critical to read with the right understanding. It might be Plato's Republic. These are books I recur to a lot for various reasons.
Tall cotton, all right.
The fourth book, and you don't give me any restriction here, right? I don't have to be simple books or anything.
No, clearly.
Because for dealing with a lot of the issues and isms of our day, I think it's essential that one have a familiarity with. You don't have to necessarily read it, but you have to be instructed a little bit in its consequences with a book that had very serious intellectual consequences, and that was Kant's Critique of Pure Reason.
Okay.
It has a high-flown title and everything, but it's really about a fairly simple thing, taking a look at the limits of our way of understanding things.
And
that's all it's about. And I think that that's a critically important book in my view. And the fifth one, always keep in mind that these things are, right off the top of my head at the moment.
You're going to come back to me and go, oh, shoot.
Right, of course I will.
Right.
But a fifth book I think is important. And here, I almost want to say that there are 2 books tied for this position, right? Because I've done a lot with books that I would say are essential to right thinking, yes, and to understanding how to defend right thinking, biblically based, but also with a sense of science and philosophic underpinnings. But then you also have to understand
I'm
the mind
failing
of,
as a nag. See,
Yes.
give me the two titles.
you have to understand the mind of your adversary.
Yes.
I got to explain this
All
because
right, go ahead.
otherwise
No.
this book is very
If you say one
wrong.
of mine that I'm about to say, I'm going to be bummed.
One book that I would say is worth reading in the complexity of our day is just browse through. Make it a constant thing you browse through because it'll help you to recognize origins. Montaigne's essays. And I think that's because his thinking and the things he talked about and the way he talked about them have serious and significant relationship to everything going wrong these days. The understandings that are wrong, a lot of them Montaigne was deceived with. And finally, and I don't recommend
Tied for
this book
fifth. Go ahead.
to everybody, tied for fifth. I wouldn't recommend this book or any writings by this person because I think, I will say at the beginning, people say, is the Antichrist come? I think that, as is said in the Scripture, Antichrists, those who are part of the body of the Antichrist, have been amongst us from the beginning. One of the chief philosophers who I believe was definitely of the body of the Antichrist was Machiavelli.
See,
And
I
if
said
you-
don't take one of mine.
If you seriously want to think through
The Prince?
the snares, you start with the Prince. But of course, you won't understand the Prince if you don't read eventually the discourses. But
The discourses, one of my master's degree teachers said that the discourses were actually more important, in his opinion.
well,
Yeah.
that's why I said, obviously, if you can't understand the Prince without reading the discourses, and you read the Prince, then you'll want to understand the Prince, so you're going to have to read the discourse. It's actually essential. And it's not the only
ask me
thing.
my five?
Yes, what are your five?
I don't read.
Oh, okay, right.
Except have picture books. Tough crowd. All right. First, obviously, the scriptures. What I have been telling leaders for 20 years, the second most important book that you could read if you want to be a leader is William Manchester's treatment of Churchill called The Last Lion Alone. It's a 3-volume set. The first one is The Last Lion, Visions of Glory. The second one is The Last Lion Alone. The third one just came out post-death, co-written, called The Last Lion, Defender of the Realm. But the last
So
line...
do I get to be the nag now?
Sorry, go ahead. Yes, please be the next. All right, so go on with it, Randall. All right, so The Last Lion Alone. And if you want to maybe grasp what you're saying about the Declaration and really solidify your thinking in the connection between civil governance and the scriptures, and that this is a theocentric government, or it was a theocentric government, Gary Amos defending the Declaration would be a good primer for that. Then, know thy enemy. If you really know the scriptures and you can really articulate theocentric governance, Old and New Testament applied to the purpose of government and the limits of government. If you get that, then I would read the Communist Manifesto. I would know the Communist Manifesto to see the insidious nature of our current Democratic and Republican leaders, that we have become, without firing a shot, we have become a Marxist experiment. I would recommend, again, To Know Your Enemy. I would recommend Ibn Ishaq's treatment of Muhammad, The Life of the Prophet Muhammad by Ibn Ishaq. He wrote that about 100 years after Muhammad's death. I believe that Islam is the single greatest threat on the face of the earth to the human race. And if you want to understand Islam, you have to understand Muhammad. And this is a very clear treatment of Muhammad's life that will disabuse anyone of the idea that Islam is an inherently peaceful religion. So, how many did I do?
No, fine.
I think that was 4. Did I do? I did. That was 5. So, all right.
See, and you got me on that, but now I'm thinking of this whole list of things that I would have
and
to
I
add
would.
to
The
that.
Prince is a critical book. I mean,
The other critical book that I didn't add because I wanted to do the last two in a more general kind of know thy enemy sense, but in terms of knowing America, not knowing it as it is now, but knowing it as it was meant to be in principle. I think Tocqueville got it right. And so if you read Democracy in America, he has a very clear vision of what was making it possible for the American experiment to work the way it was supposed to.
Okay, so to continue being the nag, any other books, by the way? Anything that you missed? Because I thought of a couple.
The only book that I would think of is, I think people ought to read Democracy in America, Tocqueville's book, to
Right,
understand how and what was the thinking that made America work in the first place? Because I think he got it. He got a very good sense of it.
Another, the Melian dialogue would be good from Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian Wars to see the mindset of it's Machiavelli applied. Might makes right. Anyway, I had all these books shooting through my head.
Well, if you start talking books,
You know
we could
what
be
we'll
here
do?
forever.
Let's do this for the rest of this time together. You can just interject a book at any moment. It has no context, no bearing, nothing.
Okay.
Just any book. Oh, and read that. All right. So I wanted to come back to the unholy alliance between the religious right and the Republican Party. With this fun backdrop, many people who are devout Christians have lamented the slave-like devotion of African Americans to the Democratic Party, you know, trying to take the speck out of their eye, never seeing the beam in our own eye. I'll stop. I'll let you talk. Please take the floor, sir.
Well, in honesty, I think that the great problem with slavish devotion to the Republican Party for conservatives who say they believe in our constitutional form of government, in the Declaration, and therefore in God's role in our politics, is that the Republican Party no longer believes in those things. And I think that's pretty clear and evident. They pay lip service.
There is a fight going on inside the party.
No, there isn't.
You don't think
That's
so?
all nonsense.
You don't
the
believe
party
that?
is ruthlessly under the control of money powers and a political leadership that is doing ruthlessly everything. So you're wasting time and energy trying to pretend that those people are going to give you victory. They never will.
Yeah, but
and they
there's
are
been a
now
few-
in control.
There's been a few good people. I like Gohmert, for example, out of Texas. He's a good guy.
You're not
He's a
listening.
Republican.
The point is that the party is now under control. Individuals in it may pop up here and there, but the party is not going to come together to do the things that are necessary to save the Constitution, to respect the Declaration,
Certainly not
because
the
the
Karl
leadership
Roves and the Mitt
will
Romneys,
not
right.
let it happen. Okay? So you can win a victory here and there, and that not only that, but they're shrewd people. They're like people running a rigged casino. If you're running a
Every
rigged,
once in a while,
hold
you
it.
gotta
If
have
you run a
some,
rigged
right.
casino, the losers are going to win. Every now and again, they'll win
Right,
big.
right.
Somebody will win big. But overall, the House will never, ever, ever let the profit shift in the direction of the people using the casino. And yet the whole purpose of government is supposed to be to represent the interest, profit, gain, whatever you want to call it, of the people who come into the casino. Political parties don't exist to make money. They don't exist to win office. They're supposed to exist to choose people to represent the people at large in the legislature and in the offices. Without representation, our Constitution is worthless.
I'm going to say a name, and you tell me what you think. Edward Snowden.
If he hadn't taken his intelligence to the enemy, then I would think he was doing a public service, and I'd help to defend him as he was in jail and other things going on. You know about that. He could have sparked a very important cause, and people would rally around him. Take our intelligence to the enemy, which is a deep and effective body blow against the security of this country, and I call you a traitor. People can call him whatever you want. You don't seek refuge with people who are our enemies or our potential enemies and hand them something with which to kill us.
Well, I don't know that he did that, number one. Number two, he wanted to go south to South America, and we negotiated that he could never fly over the airspace. So I think that he fled
You
to where
weren't
he could
listening.
flee. Oh, I listened.
He should have taken a leaf out of Randall Terry's book. There are certain points which, if you
You're
want to
ready
make
to suffer.
them, you go to jail.
Yeah.
And the people who agree with you will make sure that you do not stand alone. And that would certainly have happened in this case.
He would have been more of a hero had he been here. I concur with that. I
Well,
do concur with that.
you can't. To me, you can't be a hero. I believe that in terms of things happening in the Ukraine and other stuff like this, you're not going to make me believe that Putin isn't blustering the way he is right now, because he has a greater sense of our vulnerability confirmed by intelligence he shouldn't have, and that we aren't acting now at a disadvantage because sources and methods have been exposed to our friends, much less our enemies, that were vital to our security.
All right, I'll say another name. Vladimir Putin.
I think Putin is a very shrewd and very dangerous leftover from the old Soviet regime. People always want to forget that Putin is ex-KGB, and with the de-emphasis on the X. And sadly, I think there is a certain dovetail effect between Putin and Obama. It's
All
a
right,
1984 effect. Remember, 1984 was about the point at which government ceased to be about anything except power and control, and they actually foment wars with one another in order to enhance their power and control. And I think that the Putin and Obama fit into that pattern.
Barack Hussein Obama.
I think he is like Machiavelli. Remember what I said about Machiavelli? That he is of the Antichrist. I think Obama is of the Antichrist.
So you don't like him?
It's not a question of like or dislike. That's not
That
it.
was a softball.
I know,
Come
but it's
on.
not. I don't like or dislike
he's a bad
Obama.
man.
I think that Obama is and is acting for and is himself committed to things that are deeply wrong and wicked. And
He's
one
an
of those
evildoer.
things is that he is actively destroying my country.
John Boehner.
I think John Boehner, unfortunately, is a collaborator with Obama. That's about the worst thing I could say about a politician right now.
Karl Rove.
I think Karl Rove is somebody who is the heart and soul of the money-worshiping, godless Republican leadership.
Nancy Pelosi, just for fun.
No, I think Nancy Pelosi is, a tool of ideological leftist totalitarianism. And the fact that she pretends that she is somehow still a Roman Catholic and a believer in God adds an insult to our intelligence, to the insult she is already paying to our liberty.
Cliven Bundy.
I actually think that Cliven Bundy has been doing what is needed right now. We've got to remind the people who think they're just going to walk all over our rights that we remember the Declaration, that it is our right, it is our duty to resist a government that seeks systematically to alter or abolish our liberties.
I cannot think of any time in my lifetime, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I cannot think of a time when armed federal agents backed down.
No, don't take that seriously.
Well, no, even though we know that it's a pause, it was hitting the pause
it's not
button.
only a pause. What you have to remember
Tactical
is
retreat.
it wasn't even a tactical retreat.
Well, in some
Play
ways it was.
chess.
What?
There are moves you make in chess because you want to see what the other guy is doing so that you'll see how his thinking is going.
Like,
I think that Eric Holder said what is the truth about the Obama administration's view of the American people. We are a nation of cowards. A nation of cowards can be trusted to give in to intimidation. But you got to test that theory. And so they move against Clive Bundy to test the theory that having armed your domestic forces to the teeth, you can take a single family and intimidate them, and other people will be aghast and complain, but you'll get away with it. Instead, what they met was a network of resistance from Americans identifying with Clive Bundy. It's not just him, because what impressed me most was that when the call went out, it was not even just that a call went out. It was a kind of graded call, like the system they use to respond to the terrorist threat. There was a level of threat. At one level of threat, if you feel like going and standing with Clive, do it, but I'll think about issuing a call later. And then a call goes out. Oh, everybody who has said that they're going to stand together, it's time for you to come stand with Clive Bundy. So people were doing the Minuteman thing, the true understanding of militia, in the same way that people did it at the time of the founding.
I think that the federal government right now, NSA and company, are scrutinizing every phone call, every text, every email that came from within that radius, because they have the ability to do it, and they are making a portfolio, a profile on all of the players that were there.
Could be, but
I think that
you
it
know
was
what
a data
I think is
recovery.
interesting.
I mean, they were
Yeah.
literally just
They were like
See
what people
who's-
used to do to test the pattern of anti-aircraft fire. You would send a little squadron over to light up the anti-aircraft battery so you'd know where they were. And I think that is you're exactly right. But what I also was impressed by was that Americans know this. They've known it for months now because of Snowden. That all of us are living in, as it were, a fishbowl when we deal with electronic communications and information. But it didn't stop them. And frankly, I don't think it should. The day may come when we can no longer use those instruments. But what is clear is that, that, contrary to what they say, knowledge isn't really power by itself. Because you still have to have the ability to act on that knowledge. And I think that is what they were really testing. The root of the word conspiracy, by the way, contrary to what some people seem to think, is still spiritus. It means to act in a common spirit. The people on the left act in a common spirit. All the people who call themselves liberals and all of this, been to the same schools, learned all the same secular, godless garbage.
The Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Herodians. The only time that they ever agreed on anything was to kill Christ.
Right. They have a common mind. And they don't have to get together in the back room anymore to work out the details because they're acting from common premises and principles. One of these days soon, and I think it's already happening because of Clive Bundy, I was convinced, God-fearing people are going to remember. What is the most successful conspiracy in that spiritual sense in the history of mankind?
Well, I would say the crucifixion of Christ. I mean, the condemning of an innocent man.
No, that wasn't a successful conspiracy because you misunderstand the crucifixion. The crucifixion was not a failure.
Oh, no. I get that.
No, you don't, because you just said it was a failure. The crucifixion was not the success of the conspiracy against Christ. The crucifixion was the success of God's conspiracy for the salvation of us all.
Oh, nice.
Okay? And that conspiracy continues. What's the most successful?
I stand corrected, but just badly.
What's the most successful conspiracy? The most successful conspiracy in the history of humankind is the conspiracy of the followers of Jesus Christ. Those who receive and act in the Spirit of God that He is, living and working and acting in this world. And it has already, not just in the United States, but everywhere on earth, Christ has transformed.
No, I thought you meant what is the most successful negative?
But I was trying to redefine things so that one would understand. The word conspiracy is not just negative. It simply means that which is done by people who are breathing together. You can take it to mean whispering in the background, or you can take it to mean what it does mean in a spiritual sense. Because the Spirit is the breath. The Spirit is the wind, as Christ says at one point. It is here and there. And to act in the Spirit of Christ is to engage in something that's like what we talked about. Think about that day you described at the beginning. You are praying for help. And the Spirit of God is breaking my heart to help you. That is God's conspiracy.
Divine conspiracy.
And it cannot be resisted. And man will not triumph over it. And that's the spirit in which Christian people have acted and triumphed even in death. Because your death can be a manifestation of the Spirit that inspires, that is like an explosion, that then spreads it into the hearts and lives of thousands and millions. It cannot be defeated. And I think that if we remember that soon, we'll know what we need to do.
Where do we go from here?
Well, it means in what sense? I mean, spiritually, it's clear.
Spiritually,
we need
politically.
to make God the focus, and we need to stop making money and making excuses and making survival and all this other stuff.
Hold on a second. As a Catholic, I have been a student, as have you, of theology and of various strains of Christianity for decades now. And when a Catholic says, put God at the center, those words mean something very different than an Anabaptist evangelical. A Catholic putting God first means I apply the totality of my faith to every aspect of life, including the body politic, including my duty to my neighbor. With some strains of evangelical Christianity, putting God first means I forget about all those things. So,
well, see, I don't.
When you say put God first, what do you mean?
I mean putting God first, but I don't. I guess I don't know enough to understand what you just said. Maybe there are folks who think that
politics is of the devil. I've heard that thing.
I think there are folks like that, but why on earth then did the Word become flesh?
Again, thou thinkest like a Catholic.
No. I think like a Christian person. It's not just Jesus Christ isn't just the Word.
King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
No, He is the Word made flesh. So Jesus was specifically sent in order to make it clear that in this flesh we are to behave according to the Spirit of God. We are not to reject the flesh for the sake of the Spirit of God. We are to behave in the flesh for the sake of the Spirit of God, right? And so there are things that we must do in this fleshly form
All right,
in
talk
order
about some
to
of them.
accord with the Spirit of God. And if you are King David, I mean, do folks want to deny that King David had an obligation to God to rule over his people righteously? He was in the flesh, but he had an obligation to God. And that was before Christ came in order to live, in order to die, in order to be resurrected, so he could become the indwelling principle of our flesh. See, when we accept Jesus, he becomes the indwelling principle. That's what the apostle says, of our flesh. And therefore, in acting in this flesh, we act according to the mind of Christ. Now, as I recall, who is Christ? Christ is priest,
Prophet, priest,
prophet,
and king.
and king. Right? And there are times when we are called upon to be the ministers of God's Spirit, the pastors and the priestly functions and so forth and so on, which even as individuals we can have in bringing the gospel to others. And sometimes we have to be willing to be open to the Spirit in order to open our eyes to the Spirit's way of seeing things and talk to others about how God is helping us to see things with the eyes of that Spirit, which is what the prophets do, I think. Right? It's not just about making predictions about the future and all this. No, it's just a way of looking at the world that lets the Spirit open your eyes and lets the eye of the Spirit be your eye as you are looking at things and giving priority to those things. And finally, king. Well, as Americans, as American citizens, we are part of the sovereign body of the people who take the place. As a people, we take the place of the old kings. And people are confused about this in America. They think the president's king or something, or something, the Constitution's king. No. The Constitution was written by we the people. Therefore, we have power over the Constitution, and it even has terms in it, how we exert that power and how we manifest that power through amendment processes and other things like this. We are the sovereign. Now, do you think if we have been called by God's providence, placed by God's providing in the position of being for our country, members of a body that is to our country what David was to the people of Israel, king over that country. You don't think we have an anointing for that? You don't think we're going to be held accountable for how we use that?
I believe we will.
I believe we will, yes.
How do we turn this around? We're on a slow and quickening descent into the jaws of hell as a republic. How do we turn this thing around?
Yeah, two things about hell, though.
All right, darkness, evil.
No, because I like to use the word, but as I recall, at least in one sense of the term, isn't it our understanding that Jesus knows hell pretty well? He actually wandered around the place and conquered it, as I recall. It's all conquered. It's all our territory. The devil only thinks he owns it now.
The gates of hell shall not prevail against us.
No, it did not, because Jesus, did his thing, and he was like a scout or spy, and he tells us what we need to know about hell. And the first thing we need to know about it is not to be afraid of hell, because we don't have to be afraid of hell if we're with him, because he goes in and out. He went into hell, God lifted him out. We think we're going into hell, God will lift us out so long as we're walking in Jesus' way, right, and doing Jesus' thing. So I don't know why people are so afraid of hell if they have both Christian spirit and Christian faith and are living confidently in that faith. We don't have to be afraid of hell, and we don't have to worry about it. So I don't see myself or America or anything else necessarily going to hell. I think we're moving away from God.
I said it metaphorically.
I know, but we're moving away from God. And in moving away from God, we are in fact giving up our lives, our true lives, for all true life must come from God. If we care, therefore, about life, if we want to live, then we must do everything necessary to bring our country back to its original understanding, which was in line with the Scripture, in line with the Bible, in line with Christ, in looking to God as the source of our governance. And it ought to be easy for people as Christians because the law is an indwelling principle for us. It doesn't mean that we're not going to act according to God's law. It just means that it is not for us a constraint. It is rather a liberation. We are free in the law, and we feel free in the law, and that freedom is the freedom that is supposed to prevail in our country. And it's time that we got back to that. Second thing, we need to identify the practical, single most important obstacle to the triumph of that understanding which was the original one, the Declaration understanding. And I'm going to shock a lot of people, and maybe a lot of people dislike me when I say it.
This is the number one obstacle.
The number one obstacle to restoring the Declaration understanding in America is the Republican Party.
Hold on. Hold on. Jump back. Slap myself. The single greatest impediment.
Right. To restoring the understanding of God that was there in the Declaration to the politics and way of life of the United States is the Republican Party.
Explain it in 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes.
3 minutes.
Because everybody would expect me to say Obama. Obama's the enemy.
No, let me say, no, wait,
No,
wait, no,
let
no,
me finish what I'm saying.
No,
I just
wanna say
started
mine.
something. No,
I
you
know,
have to let me finish.
I want to just say one thing and then you talk.
Okay, go ahead.
An enemy outside of your camp makes you vigilant. An enemy in your camp makes you dead because he can cut your throat in the night, poison your food
But
in the
what
day.
does that mean?
The Republican Party. In other words,
That
I'm
means,
echoing.
you're just going ahead. You often do, and that's fine. But
It's a gift.
the point being that Obama is the enemy that we recognize as the enemy, right? And when we look at Obama, everybody, as a matter of fact, in that sense, Obama has been almost like a gift to a lot of people around America. He's waking them up. He's making them see that tyranny is possible, that it's coming, that it's already at work, that it's trying to kill cattle and destroy families, that it's hard at work to destroy the moral foundation. Obama is the enemy that we recognize, okay? What is the Republican Party? Republican Party, actually, they tell us that they're the guys defending the walls. They're the guys who are going to keep the walls in repair, that are going to send the troops out to stand on the walls and keep the enemy out, and so forth and so on. If it turns out that they're lying, and that in point of fact they're collaborating with the enemy, who poses the greatest danger? Because the people are all ready. They're all ready to do what's necessary, but if you put them under the guidance of people collaborating with the enemy, they're going to send you to the front gate when the enemy's at the back gate. They're going to tell you to eat this food when the enemy has poisoned it. Okay? And the Republican Party denotes itself as the party of the collaborators because it worships money. It worships money, it worships financial success, and it worships the power of material things. This is not what America was founded on, much to the lying screed that is out there amongst a lot of people. Okay? America was founded on an understanding of man's relationship with God for the sake of right and justice. And that was what Lincoln was about. Okay? And he even says in one of his most famous speeches, if all the wealth built up by the centuries of bondsman toil must be spent, okay, so that justice will be satisfied, then as it was said, 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. That was the founding president of the Republican Party. How far have we come from that to Karl money-worshipping Rove? How far have we come from that to Rand, freedom is God, libertarian Paul? Okay? No, God is God. And God rules. And by those rules, justice and right are established. And for the sake of those who choose to accept and follow justice and right, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of those who are governed by the laws of nature and nature's God, the righteous. Well, it's about time the righteous came together, but the Republicans are doing everything in their power to make sure that doesn't happen. They're doing everything in their power to intimidate, to strike fear into the heart of, to make bashful, to lure and seduce away from God those who profess to be in the primacy of their existence, focused on God's will.
So what do we do?
Well, I actually have a practical approach that I've been pursuing for months. I think 2014 election is critical. I think Obama actually becomes the focal point around which you can rally people to resist the tyranny that is coming, and everything about it, including the rejection of God that is involved in it. But the Republicans won't do it. Have you noticed that? They don't want to make Obama the focal point of the election in 2014, even though that would probably galvanize people across every line, race and everything else, you know, except possibly for black Americans, I don't know. You would find responsive chord in every other group in America saying, oh, this guy's not what we thought. This guy's a liar. This guy's an incompetent. This guy has been attacking our troops and destroying our security and bowing to our enemies and helping those who are trying to destroy us. Yeah, do I want... So what? I often ask people, think to yourself, how many people do you know who, if they could snap their fingers and Barack Obama would no longer be president, would snap their fingers? I think we'd have people snapping their fingers in every place, every grace and creek. Now, hold on.
Sounds like
so
a
there is a way,
cafe.
there is a peaceful way that doesn't require violence and bullets and mob demonstrations like over there in the Arab world. All these people talking about we need an Arab Spring. I am not an Arab. I don't need an Arab anything. Okay, I don't mind the Arabs, but I don't want their spring. We don't need an
Irish
Spring, let me say
but
this.
not an Arab Spring, no.
We don't need an Arab Spring. We need an American fall. We need an American autumn, okay? And America, autumn means go to the polls and vote. And this time we need to go to the polls and vote to remove Barack Obama and Biden and all their collaborators and cronies from office. Oh, we can't do that. We vote for Congress. No, put the right Congress in, guess what you get? A Congress that will impeach and remove Barack Obama as the Constitution allows for at any stage in his tenure. Okay, make that the focus, and I'm doing it. I have a site where we're inviting people to pledge to impeach. And what that means is you take a citizen's pledge. I'm not going to vote for anybody who doesn't sign a pledge that when they get into Congress in January 2015, they will initiate and cooperate in the process necessary to impeach Obama and bring him to trial before the Senate. Okay? And I'm working with people who are building that up. And I keep asking folks, what if by the time the election rolls around, 1 million people have signed that pledge? How many candidates do you think will want to go and sign the candidates pledge, because they'll be able to collect tens of thousands of votes in their district just by doing so, right? Now, admittedly, I would have to confess, most of the people who'd be tempted to do that would be Republicans, I bet. See? But they're Republicans that the party is not working with to unite behind an impeachment effort, because they're cowards or they're collaborators. Okay? But the people can demand it at the polls in the way they use their vote, but they command it before Election Day by saying, we're going to use our vote this way, and if you ignore it, you're going to lose our votes. Okay? So 1 million people would be a big achievement. If you got 2 or 3 million, which is possible on the internet, you know, things can pick up hits in days that amount to several million, much less in the months we have left before the election. So if you really started to focus people on this and said, what's your heart's desire? My heart's desire is that Barack Obama and Biden and all these totalitarian, commie, leftist individuals will be out of office and stop destroying our country. How many Americans do you think would agree with that statement? I bet there are millions upon millions upon millions of them. And that if even 2 or 3 million of those millions were to sign the pledge saying we demand from a candidate that you impeach, and if you don't sign this pledge, we won't vote for you. That would get all their attention. And nothing the Republicans did with their money, nothing they did with their infrastructure, nothing the godless, grassroots-hating leadership does with its remonstrances and fear-mongering would change that one iota. And so I think it's a way to do an end run around a political system that no longer wants to represent or thinks it needs to represent the people of this country. And by doing that, we would reassert what really ought to govern America. Because what ought to govern America is the strength of what's going on among the people themselves at the grassroots. Not money power, banking power, political power, bureaucratic power. None of that's supposed to govern this country. The people of the country are making a demand based on their right understanding of what is required to secure their rights as they come from God, are supposed to be in charge of America. And so if people with that kind of mind pulled together, signed the pledge to impeach, and made that demonstration, if it grew to 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, by the time we got to the last 2 weeks of the election, it would change the political landscape for good.
Are you going to run for president again?
I think all talk of 2016 is premature by me or anybody else. They want to focus us on 2016 so that we won't do anything before then. And I think some people on the wrong side of things are convinced that they will have created enough facts in this country that it will be impossible to undo them by the time we get to 2016, even if the unlikely were to happen and the Republicans were actually to nominate a candidate who reflected conservative, God-fearing tenets, which they haven't done in at least the last 2 elections, meaning no offense to Romney and McCain. If they take it, I won't care, though. Because I am not talking about their religion. I'm talking about the stands that they both
Public
took
policy, yeah.
on public policy issues that were identical to the stands of Barack Obama we have all learned to love to hate.
Dr. Alan Keyes, I count you as a friend. I count you as a great American hero, and I thank you. I thank you publicly for the critical moments in my tumultuous life when you stepped forward and stood near me, put your arm around me, both in reality and metaphorically. I am in debt to you. I have a debt of honor to you, and I'm just delighted to call you a friend and a compatriot, and hope we get to see some good people in heaven together.
Well, I appreciate the debt you feel to me, Randall, but I feel indebted to you, but not for my own sake only. I feel indebted to you for the times when you have stood when nobody else would, in the places where we must stand to save this country. You know, it is said of a physics principle that if you give me a place to stand, I can move the world. Was that Archimedes or somebody? No, I think in terms of our world, if you give us a person willing to stand for God, that person can move the world. And so many times in my lifetime, you have been that person and you still are. And I thank God for you.
Thank you. Love you.